Hey guys, welcome to our remote session of this class today. I really regret not being able to come in and see you guys before the break, but I was finally able to kind of nurse my voice back to a reasonable amount of health, so we're just going to do this remotely today. Looking forward to seeing everybody after the break, but until then, please do just kind of carefully watch through this video. On tap for today, we're going to review finally the exercise 6 floor plan number 2 that we weren't able to get to last week either. So we're going to talk a little bit about that to start with. Then we're going to review the annotation stuff. I do want to go through and talk about some pretty important things in the annotation mistakes assignment. This is sort of the lead up to you doing the annotations yourself, and so it's really important that you understand kind of what not to do so that you know the parameters to work within for that next assignment. And then we're also going to talk about the annotation guideline quiz. We'll take a quick look at that. And then we'll finish up by reviewing exercise 7 and 8. So those were on tap for review today, but obviously we weren't able to do that live, so we'll go ahead and handle that in the video. So let's get right to it. Exercise 6, floor plan 2, asked you to once again kind of fill in an unfinished plan. This one I actually drew some inspiration from, and I'm just going to pull up the original here. This floor plan right here, this was actually the one that I downloaded online and I used as sort of the starting point for this assignment. The reason I chose this layout is because it's small, it's very compact, and as you're quickly learning, those tight floor plans are the ones that are the most difficult, the most challenging to try to find room for everything and then still make it seem reasonably spacious. Another good example of very efficient use of space is in the Habitat for Humanity assignment that we use in AE 150, our blueprint reading class. And in both cases, you'll find that the bedrooms are maximally sized for the space, and the space is used incredibly efficiently, which is really what I'm trying to get everybody to kind of focus on, is just trying to maximize the usable spaces and minimize those spaces that are just sort of considered necessary evils, like the hallways, like stairways and things like that. So the theory goes, the less space you have to use for circulation, the more space you're going to have for your actual living space. So this is I did obviously change this area quite a bit on what I gave you, the CAD file that I gave you to start with. But this entire area over here was sort of the focus of you trying to fit in those things. And so this is one possible solution. I do want to kind of use at least one of your drawings as an example to just kind of go through. And then we're going to talk about some general drafting stuff, just kind of some review from earlier on in the semester. But taking a look at this floor plan, you can see that the hallway is really minimalized. So not just the width of the hallway, which looks like it's kind of down near the limits of code, which I would say, maybe you could expand that just a little bit even on this plan. But the length of the hallway is also minimalized. So it uses a consistent width all the way through, and it's L-shaped. And so there's just enough space to get to both of these back bedrooms over here, but no more extra space in the hallway than is necessary. We don't hang out in hallways. We just have to walk through them, and sometimes there's a little bit of traffic in there. You got to get by somebody. So a wider hallway when you have the space is a little nicer, but I think what they've done with this is a very efficient design. There's just enough space used to get to the rooms you need to. I'm not sure I would want to move a large piece of furniture into this door because the hallway is tight around this corner, obviously, right? But there are sacrifices you have to make with a smaller house like this. This is very economical design. There's minimal corners on the outside. Things like that really contribute to the efficiency and the cost savings on a sort of a lower income or what some might consider a more sustainable design. So here's one of the examples from some of the work you guys submitted. And this person did a really nice job of, again, minimizing, the hallway. I would take issue a little bit with sort of this little jog right here. Not terrible, but perhaps this wall could have been shifted up just to be a little bit more efficient. And then this area probably could have been expanded. But beyond that, I think this does a really nice job. Also, this linen closet right here, it sort of wastes a little bit of space in front of it, And so like that linen closet could have been either made bigger and accessed it from the side here, is one possible solution to sort of use that tiny bit of wasted space in the hallway that we have here. But beyond that, the whole thing is really efficient. We do have a bathroom coming in here, and we're just sort of trying to be innovative, I think, and use this squarish shape to do a 3/4 bath. And I think this is a pretty reasonable job of that. It's not ideal having to access the walk-in closet through the bathroom for reasons we've discussed already. But, you know, given the parameters, this was a tough assignment. And so I think this person did a pretty good job of making it happen. One thing I would mention about the bedrooms 1 and 2, they're pretty similar sized, and they sort of had to be a little bit off-sized just because of the access issue right here. We couldn't have pushed this wall up north too much farther to equalize these bedrooms, maybe just a little bit. One thing I would say that when we have a scenario like this where we're entering against a closet, I know that this person probably held that wall back just to kind of make it easier to move large objects in and out of this room. But typically what we're going to do is try to run that just a little bit closer to the door to maximize the closet space a little bit. Okay, I'm going to switch over to AutoCAD now, and I think what I'll do is actually do a print preview to make this easier to see on screen. And this one is actually really similar to the original. I tried to reproduce it as closely as I could with the changes obviously that I made to the kitchen and the laundry room over here. But this one is reasonably faithful to the original design. I just wanted to kind of show it and see what it would look like. See if I could get close. The only major difference between mine and the original is how we access these closets. And I will just pull up the original again real quick just so you can see the difference. These are very similar to the previous example I just looked at, where the doors sort of enter against a closet space. And so this is sort of giving some nice large closets in this area, whereas the original, which I'll pull up now, as you can see, the closets are a little more than half the size of the previous one. And that's accomplished by just accessing the room adjacent to that space. But other than that, it's pretty close to the same. So I just wanted to show that it can be done. Those parameters can be met if you really struggled with that. This is one possible solution. I want to show you one other as well. Since I asked all of you to do this assignment without a cheat sheet, I felt sort of obligated to take a stab at it myself and try to do something original, not just copying the existing or the original one. And so this is what I had come up with for this, and obviously the annotations are not in here, but you get the gist of what I was trying to do. We have a nice straight hallway that is minimally sized, just enough room to get down into this door right here and right here. We do have a very small, some might even say almost non-functional walk-in closet, but there it is. That was one of the compromises I made. And then it does have a nice, technically 3/4 bath, but it's pretty large. In fact, it's larger than the main bath right here, as you can see. And then I just sort of added a door over here at the end of the laundry room to gain access to what I'm using as the furnace room. So we have a water heater and a furnace in there, and that's fairly spacious as well. Large-ish pantry, or excuse me, linen closet. And then the bedrooms all meet the minimum size requirements or guidelines that I gave in the instructions. And really the trick to putting a puzzle like this together kind of comes down to the known sort of established shapes and sizes of things like bathrooms and walk-in closets and bedrooms. And, you know, I'm trying to keep the bedrooms as square, close to square as possible, not L-shaped. And I think overall that happened, but you really kind of have to work it like a jigsaw puzzle because as I found out personally, you know, my first idea that I tried to go with just did not work, and I had to sort of back up and take another stab at this thing. So I finally landed on this, and I'm reasonably happy with it. It's not perfect, but given the parameters, it's a tough assignment, and I think it worked out okay. So given how many years I've been doing this and how bad I struggled, I have sort of some renewed empathy for you guys having to work through this, and I have to say that the work that you guys turned in is really amazing given the small amount of time that you've been doing this stuff. So just hats off to you guys. Big kudos to all of you for the effort that you put into this thing. I'm really impressed. Okay, that said, I want to talk about a few things, a few common mistakes. These are going to be review things that we did talk about early in the semester, but I'm noticing some consistent missing of some key design elements that I want to talk about, and then I want to circle around and talk about some drafting standard stuff that's also going to be a review. So let's talk about the design stuff first. First of all, when we're doing a bathroom, and I'm just going to zoom in on this one right here. When we're doing a bathroom, I notice that some folks are sort of just throwing the vanity in there and not making sure that it runs over to the end. Now, if we have a wall-mounted sink, like you see in some older motels and other places, where it's just the sink itself, just a porcelain sink bolted right to the wall, it's fine to have a gap between that and a wall. But when you have a vanity with a countertop, typically that's going to be pushed all the way against the wall. And then also the gap for the toilet that's left, you really don't want to exceed 3 feet there. You want to use that space as much as possible by increasing the vanity size or increasing the shower size, or both. But make sure that you're code compliant, so you have that 30 inches, 15 inches from the center on each side, and then just a little bit more than that's fine, 3 or even maybe 3.5 feet. But if it gets much more than that, it just starts looking like it was just sort of like randomly placed in this wide open space, right? Same thing is true, like on this type of configuration. The tub itself, this tub block that you see here, is a tub insert. So we see these all the time. They're just big fiberglass inserts. They get attached to the wall and they're wedged into this 5-foot space. There's no gaps. This is not a freestanding tub. This is a tub insert. If I had a clawfoot tub that is a freestanding, those older style tubs that just sort of like sat out in the middle of the floor, that would be different, and you could certainly have gaps. But when you have a tub like this, you have to run it to where your walls are right tight against it. That's how these are done. But then the same thing with the gaps. Just use all of that space in the bathroom. And as mentioned before, try to use a common plumbing wall if you can. Not always possible, not always practical, but certainly on the small bathrooms that require efficiency, as these ones would, a single plumbing wall is the best. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that these window openings that we create, sometimes we have to bring the windows in, size them, and then cut the opening so that we know exactly how big to make it. But in AutoCAD, when we put a window in, at least these window blocks that we're using, the window opening should be trimmed out just like a door opening, okay? So make sure that you're cutting those off. If you delete the windows, it should look just like this in AutoCAD. And then finally, I want to talk about door jamb size. Remember that when you have a door, especially a swinging door like this, but even in the case of a bifold door, we're going to want a jamb on each side of that thing because we're going to trim out that opening. We're going to have to put casework on this part of the wall, this part of the wall in the back. And not always true with bifold doors. Sometimes we're just going to run those right up against a flat wall, but in most cases, they're going to be framed out like this. So be thinking about that minimum jamb size. That would be the size of the jamb from this point right here over to this point right here, and be consistent with that. It would be a similar thing on this side, but the most important one is the hinged side of the door, because we want those to come up and hit the door stop at a consistent distance. We don't want that thing to be really big on one door and then really small on another door. Just figure out what that jamb size is and just try to stay consistent with it. I usually like to use 4 inches. That would accommodate most casework, and it also accommodates the studs that have to go into that wall. Finally, I'd just like to talk about a couple of drafting things, and I'm going to go ahead and do a print preview again. Notice that on this floor plan, I am not seeing the hidden lines on these closet rods. I'm not seeing hidden lines for the door swings, which we normally would, or the shelving, or the under cabinet stuff going on there. So I've got a problem. When I don't see hidden lines, that means I haven't set up my layout correctly. And just remember that with those hidden lines, we're automatically sizing those non-continuous lines using the LT scale options, all 3 of which should be set to 1. Now in model space, we can set model space scale to 1, and we can see it in model space the way that it's supposed to go. But if we go to our layout tab, we have another setting that we have to do right in that layout, which is PSLT scale, paper space LT scale. And that also should be set to 1 on any layout that you intend to print, and then you will have to do a regen all to get it to display properly. But after that, you won't have to do that again. You're going to be all set. So let's go ahead and do another print preview here. And now you can see that the hidden lines are showing up the way that they're supposed to. Looks way better, doesn't it? The other thing I'm seeing is we're still getting a lot of confusion about the view title and the title block. I just want to go through that again real quick. First of all, the view title. There's a view title that's going to be present under every view, as you know. So really anytime you have a viewport, you're going to have a view title underneath it. This view title is adjustable. It's got parameters that you can go in and change. It's got attributes. One of the things we can do is stretch this line a little bit farther so that we're underlining the entire title, whatever that happens to be. And then we have basically 3 attributes in here: the name, the detail number, and the sheet number. Okay, so we have to recall where each of these things goes. So let's go ahead and double click on this to bring up the attribute editor. Here's the detail number. It's pretty easily defined. Hopefully everybody can kind of get that. That's detail number, sheet right there, and then the title. And then there also seems to be a fair amount of confusion about what to put in this title. This is just describing the view, folks. This is not describing the entire assignment, where we don't have to get fancy with it. This is just the main floor plan, okay? And if we're doing a stair section, it's just stair section. Okay, so we don't have to have the assignment name in here. We don't have to have anything in there except what it is that we're looking at right here. And then of course we just have to select the scale from the drop down. So just whatever your viewport scale is, this should match, and you should always double check both. If you select the viewport, look down. Actually this one is 3/8. So if I change this to 3/8, now they match, and I'm good to go. Okay, let's review the title block. Again, this number right here is the sheet number, and that should match this sheet number if these two things are on the same sheet, which they are. Okay, so just make sure that this and this match. Typically, sheets that are part of the architectural set are going to start with an A, and they're going to be numbered 1 up through however many sheets there are. This large attribute right here is the assignment name. And you can abbreviate that. If you just wanted to say exercise 6 right there, that would be fine. I don't need it to be the whole thing. In fact, sometimes the whole thing doesn't even fit in the title block depending on the sheet size you're using, right? So it might be necessary to abbreviate that, but that is the assignment name. If we were working on a building, this would be the project name, right? This would be sort of like Block 5 in Rapid City or whatever. But we're not working on projects in here, we're just working on assignments. So that's what we're going to fill in there. On the sheet, this one is going to quite often match whatever this one says, right? So the view title and the sheet name might be the same thing. Where that would diverge is on a sheet with multiple views on it. Say we have a sheet that has wall sections, stair sections, and large details. In that case, we would just call the sheet sections and details or something similar. The one above that, file name, that one should be fairly obvious. Just go ahead and type the actual file name of whatever you called the file that you're going to submit with the .dwg at the end. And that's just perfectly fine. The reason we put the file name in the title block is for legacy drawings that someone maybe worked on years ago. We know what file to look for to get this floor plan. And then of course your initials, you can either have 2 or 3 letters for that. So hopefully that clears up what's going on with that title block and view title. These things they may seem fairly minor, but they're important. These things are contribute to the body of work that you're doing in the ability to identify and conform to office standards, which is just, I can't emphasize enough how important that is in this field. So the sooner you can commit to learning that stuff and remembering it, going back and double checking it, the better off you'll be. Okay, we're going to move on from exercise 6. I just wanted to say one more time that you guys did a great job on this thing. It is my job to point out the negative, but I do not want to overlook the progress that you guys have made already this semester. Just keep digging. You guys are doing great. You're right on track, right where you're supposed to be. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at the annotation mistakes. This is a highlight of all of the mistakes that I felt were legitimate mistakes that we could apply for credit on this assignment. Anything outside of this, I may have issued credit for it if it was borderline, but for the most part, these are the mistakes I was looking for you to identify. So we're going to go through these one by one and just make sure everybody kind of understands what's wrong with this drawing. Feel free to pause this and take a break if that last review kind of gave you a little bit of fatigue. Take a breath, get a drink of water, whatever it is. Let's go ahead and dig in. Okay, so I'm going to start over here on the left-hand side, and as you can see, this whole dimension is highlighted, it's circled, and it's not because there's anything wrong with the dimension itself, it's just referencing the gap between the first dimension string and the second one. So you can see the correct gap up here. That's that 3/8 of an inch printed that we're looking for. This is 1 inch printed that we're looking for the first two. So those ones, this whole string along the north side of the house is correct. It's accurate. It's what we want. This one obviously diverges from that, so we don't want that. Since we're talking about spacing, let's go ahead and look at this dimension down here. Most of you caught this. This dimension really should be pulled down and aligned with this overall dimension right here. This right here isn't necessarily wrong, it's just chaotic, right? We want to have order as much as possible. That just makes it easier to read for the contractor. We'll keep things lined up whenever possible. Staying on the exterior dimension theme, this dimension line right here is referencing an interior wall. Remember, that was one of the rules that we said very early on, is with exterior dimensions, we're only dimensioning things that we can see from the outside of the house, and that doesn't include peeking in through a window, right? We got to be able to see it standing on the outside and looking at the house. And in this case, we would not see this interior wall. Let's not dimension interior walls with exterior dimensions. There are very few exceptions to that, and we'll talk about some, but for the most part, that is just a hard and fast rule. This mistake down here is actually having an extension line cross a dimension line. And some of you sort of worded it differently. You said, well, this and this should be swapped. Yeah, that's exactly what needs to happen. But ultimately, the mistake is that we've crossed a dimension line with an extension line, and that adds confusion. You can just look at this thing and see that's confusing. Where is that 18 feet? I might mistakenly think that it's from here to here, even though it's stated clearly right here. We just don't want to do that. So in this case, we would put the smaller dimension closer to the house, the larger overall dimension one layer out. Okay, lots to talk about here. Let's start in this upper left-hand corner on the interior dimensions. There's a couple things wrong with this dimension right here, this 14, 2.5. For one thing, why aren't we aligning it with this consistent string of dimensions up here? Right? Why is it down here? There's not a compelling reason for that. If we slid it up, we could always move this dimension text someplace else if it was overlapping. But we want that to be aligned whenever possible. And then over here, we've got another problem with it, right? We've got a dimension that terminates on the inside face of the wall. We always want to terminate those dimension strings on the outside face of an exterior wall. Okay, let's take a look at this area right here. Some of you rightly pointed out that this text is just unreadable. That's not very useful. Some of you also said that, we're not supposed to be dimensioning to the vanity. Well, if you look at this close enough, you can tell that's not actually dimensioning the vanity. That's dimensioning the location of this wall right here, which we do need to do someplace. But as you can see, it's already taken care of on this dimension right here. And if it wasn't, we could still dimension that, but we could set this dimension text off with a leader to make sure that it's readable. So there's nothing inherently wrong with placing a dimension here. It's dimensioning the location of this wall. It's just not readable how it is right now. Down a little bit farther here, we have the same issue that we did up top. We just don't want to start our dimension strings on the inside face of the wall. And then over here, what's going on is we've decided to shift to the left side of this wall rather than sticking with our convention of dimensioning to the right side of the wall. The reason that can be a problem is the contractor might not notice that you shifted that one, and now the inside depth of the closet is going to be 3'1" instead of the outside depth becomes deeper than what it needed to be, and then everything up here is going to be thrown off as a result. Okay, let's take a look at this large area right here. This is a mess. And a lot of you sort of identified this as being a problem, but very few of you identified what the actual problem was up there. All right, and that could be my fault. I may not have emphasized this enough when we were going through our discussion over annotation guidelines, so I want to kind of clean that up right now. What's happening here is we're shifting from the left side of the hallway to the right side of the hallway repeatedly, kind of dancing back and forth in a way that's not very helpful to the contractor. And to best illustrate that, think about how you might lay these walls out if they didn't exist and you needed to mark on the floor where they go. You're going to pull a tape measure out, but how are you going to mark way over here and way over here with a single tape pull, right? So think about dimension strings as a single tape measure pull. You pull that tape measure out and then you can just go down and mark those areas that are referenced. But you can't do that if the areas that you're referencing are so far apart from each other, okay? So this flip-flopping back and forth down the hallway is not an ideal way to dimension this thing. A better way to dimension it would be to just pick up the things on the left side with one string and then maybe just come back and pick those individual things one at a time, or maybe run a whole additional string down the right. It's just a much better way to do it, and there's plenty of room in this hallway to make that happen. As part of that area, since it's adjacent, we'll talk about this wall right here. You'll notice that there is no dimension at all to say how wide this stair opening needs to be, right, or where this wall is going to go. So that's what's going on with this highlight right here. We'll just keep going. We'll keep going on to the right. This large area, most of you got this. These extension lines are just too long. So we're trying to do too much. Again, remember the single tape pull. We're not going to be able to really use that. So these really ought to just not be part of this dimension string. We could certainly pick those up with either an auxiliary dimension or running a whole separate string down a little bit closer to it. Over here on the right, you can see that there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, the window is missing a tag, right? Everything else has a tag, and this one does not. Now, some of you pointed out that all the window tags should have a unique letter. That's actually not true with windows. Because windows have a standard configuration, any window of the same type can have the same number. The window schedule is actually going to be much smaller on most plan sets than the door schedule because the doors are not that way. Each door does have a unique number. Each window does not necessarily. Again, it just comes down to all the different configurations that come with the door versus a window. If you buy a window of a particular type, size, and model, it's going to be the same one no matter how many you buy. So we would just have a single letter to represent that type. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Let me know if it doesn't. With this wall right here, we should be calling that out as a plumbing wall. Someplace on this plan, we're probably going to have a note like this that says all interior partitions are 2x4 unless otherwise specified, or something similar to this comment. All exterior walls are 2x6 unless otherwise specified. So that means that the otherwise specified needs to be done. Okay, we got that general note down there. So we called out this one as a 2x6. There are no other 2x6s in this interior configuration except for this one right here, which was not called out. Now again, if you didn't have space for it, if it was already too cluttered, the contractor is going to be able to figure that out. But as a best practice, if you have the space to do it, go ahead and do it, especially if you've called it out one place. Down here a little bit farther, you can see that this wall right here is not dimensioned at all. I'm not talking about the opening sizes, I'm talking about left to right. Where is this wall? how deep is this closet, right? That's missing right here. And that, I believe, is all the mistakes. Those are all of the mistakes. We had a number of other things referenced, and some of them made some sense, so I went ahead and applied some credit for those. Other ones just missed the mark, or they were calling things out wrong that actually weren't wrong. So if you have anything else that you indicated on here, please do reach out if you don't understand why you didn't get credit for it, or whether or not you got credit for it, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. But for the most part, those were the mistakes that were the officially legitimate mistakes that you would get credit for. All right, let's go ahead and switch gears. We're going to talk about the annotation guidelines quiz. And this is basically a test of your understanding and the knowledge that you retained related to the annotation guidelines sheet, which is always going to be there for you. You know, you can always open that up and reference it. I would have liked to have thought that most of you had that open when you took this quiz. It certainly would have been fine to do that because a lot of the stuff is directly discussed in there. First thing is, it's important to adhere strictly to the rules outlined in the annotation guidelines, even when it results in annotations that are difficult to read. That's false. When annotations are difficult to read, sometimes we have to deviate from the strict rules. And remember that annotation guidelines has the word guidelines in it. Okay, so that means it's not a strictly adhered to list of rules. They are indeed guidelines, and you really kind of have to use your best judgment and critical thinking to navigate through any annotation assignment that you're working on. All right, question number 4. Which method is used when manually sizing things in model space to print at a predetermined size? Now, we talked about this fairly quickly, so if you didn't memorize it right away, that's fine, but the reality is, and I'm going to just take a minute to review this with you all, when you ask which method is used when manually sizing things, we have to think about the scale that we're going to print this thing at, because the scale determines exactly how much we're shrinking it down when we put it on the paper. Okay, so if we have a desired printed size, we have to blow that up by that same amount. Okay, so if we're shrinking something down to fit on a sheet of paper at a 1/4 inch per foot scale, think about how many times a 1/4 inch goes into a foot. It's a ratio, right? So if a 1/4 inch goes into an inch 4 times, then it goes into a foot 48 times, right? 4 times 12. So our drawing scale factor in that scenario is 48, which means that if we want something to be printed at its correct size, we have to blow it up 48 times. It has to be 48 times bigger, because when we print, we're shrinking it down by a factor of 48. So we multiply the desired print size by the drawing scale factor. We're making it bigger, folks, not smaller. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. If not, please do reach out. That's an important one. Number 5, annotations created in Paperspace are not scaled. That's actually true. If we create an annotation right on the sheet in AutoCAD, it's not in a viewport, which means it's not going to be scaled. It actually cannot be scaled if it's not in a viewport, unless you change the ratio that you send to the printer in the print dialog, right? Which we always print 1:1. So that one is true. Annotations created in Paperspace are not scaled. What are some examples of annotations created in Paperspace? Well, we might have a north arrow on our sheet. We might have a view title, for example, on our sheet. The text in the title block, not scaled. It's actually 3/32 seconds text in most cases. So yeah, we're only scaling text that's in model space that we're going to have to shrink down onto the sheet. Question 6, as a general rule, exterior dimensions on a floor plan are placed for every object that contacts the exterior walls, including interior walls. Now, I really would have expected more of you to get this right, because I made a pretty strong point of mentioning that when we first started talking about annotation. So some folks may have been absent. Don't feel bad. Don't beat yourself up, but memorize it now. exterior dimensions reference exterior features, period. That's it. Interior walls are defined by interior dimensions only. Okay. Jumping down to number 16, this one asks, which of the following should always be dimensioned on a floor plan? Now, remember there are some rules that define things that you don't always have to dimension. That's in the annotation guideline sheet. So go back and review those if you're not sure what they are. But there are some things that, why clutter up the plan? Because it's so painfully obvious where this thing is. Let's not do it. Okay, so your job was to find the things that should always be dimensioned, and that might have been some confusion for some folks. Might have been a better way to ask that question was which ones are not always dimensioned. But either way, you got to read the question carefully and try to figure that out. The ones that are always dimensioned are number 3, 4, and 6. The location of a door opening that is not adjacent to a wall, so it's just sort of floating in the middle of the wall. We need to know where that is. Number 4, non-standard wall thicknesses. So again, that note might not necessarily have to be a dimension, but certainly a note with the dimension in it. We need to indicate that. And then number 6, an island cabinet location. We need to know how far away from the rest of the cabinets that island, which is just floating out on the floor randomly, until we give it a dimension and tell the contractor exactly where we want it. The things that are typically not dimensioned on a floor plan, the location of a door opening with a standard jamb size. Why waste the dimension? They're going to base the location of that door on that jamb size that would be indicated elsewhere. Door and window opening sizes, that's going to be done typically in a door or window schedule. So we're going to try to leave that off the plan in most cases. 2x4 and 2x6 wall thickness. Again, the wall thickness can be called out in a general or a local note. And so if one of those is done, we really don't need to dimension it per se. And then number 7, cabinet sizes. Those are basically going to be handled through a separate schedule, or the contractor or the building owner or both will go talk to a cabinet salesperson and have them select the specific cabinets for the specific project that they're working on. So we wouldn't dimension the actual sizes of the cabinets either. And I did want to just circle back to number 4, non-standard wall thicknesses. That actually, so standard would be 2x4 and 2x6. The non-standard wall thicknesses, if we had to put in a 2x8 wall or something like that, maybe we would put a dimension on that. And then finally, 18, doors and windows should be labeled with a tag that contains all of the unit information, including size, manufacturer, and finished materials. And I think the wording of that question might be where folks ran into trouble. The door and windows should be labeled with a tag. The tag does not contain all of those things. The tag actually just contains a letter or a number, right? That letter or number would reference a schedule that would contain all of that detailed information. So just make sure that you understand what the difference is between the tag and the schedule and how they work within the plan set. Okay, let's just take a minute to breathe. We're going to continue our discussion, our review over the past assignments. We're going to queue up exercise 7 next, and then we'll talk about exercise 8. So now would be a good time to just take a breath, stretch your legs a minute, and pause this video for a minute perhaps, and come back and we'll finish up with our last discussions. All right, let's go through exercise 7. We're looking at how to annotate a floor plan, and the first thing to remember, always, no two are going to be exactly alike. If there are 2 different people doing it, even the same person doing it twice, you're probably going to have some minor variations. Now the interior dimensions, those are the ones really are going to have the most variation. There are just too many possible ways that it could be done to be super consistent with it. But as long as you follow the rules to the extent that you can, you're going to be okay. So number 1 is readability, number 2, thoroughness, accuracy, and then organization, of course, has to play a role as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this thing. We're going to start on the exterior dimensions where the rules can typically be a little bit more consistent. So just remember those exterior dimensions hierarchy We're going to start on the inside with the smallest dimensions. We're going to gradually move to the outside with larger dimensions. The spacing consistency between the dimension lines is important, as well as the spacing between the dimension lines and the object lines. So we want to make sure that we're using standard convention. Remember, it's 1 inch printed for the first one, 3/8 printed for the next ones. You'll notice that when multiple windows are assembled into a single unit like this, we're typically only going to give it one dimension to the center of the overall unit. That is going to be a single opening typically that the contractor is going to create in the framing, and they need to know where the middle of that thing is going to go. The rough opening of the units themselves are going to drive the location or the overall size rather of that rough opening, and they can work that out from the window schedule. So for the most part, these exterior dimensions are standard, but I do want to point out a few areas where they're not standard. Down in this area right here, for example, oftentimes I get the question, well, should I have 2 6-foot dimensions in there? Should I have it on the middle string or the inner string? And I would say really that's kind of a judgment call. I would say that redundant dimensions that are right next to each other are just sort of a waste of ink more than anything. Let's not do that. This would be kind of a one possible solution. Moving it, shifting it to the inner line would be a second solution that would be acceptable. Either way is kind of sort of comes down to a preference. As long as all the dimensions that are pertinent to what you would see from the outside on this side are there, really the format is will accept sort of a wide range of formats. Another somewhat odd area is right here in this alcove. Oftentimes I get questions about, should I dimension this exterior dimension out here? Should I try to push it out here on the main string of dimensions? And the answer there is no in this case. We don't want to run an extension line for an exterior dimension through the interior of our house. It just gets overly complicated. So just a single sort of rogue dimension that's freestanding in here is perfectly fine to pick up that length. Same thing on this side of the alcove. We really can't see that clearly from the outside looking this way. So rather than passing dimension lines and extension lines through our geometry, we're just going to go ahead and put another one right there. There is one other area that's kind of similar to that, and that's this part right here in the garage. This is actually technically an exterior dimension, this 4-footer. So this is sort of one of those weird gray areas. We could have pushed that 4-foot dimension out here and included it in this exterior string if we wanted to. That would have been fine as well. I chose to put it inside because I feel like it's just a little bit easier to read and understand. You might ask, why is this technically an exterior dimension? The reason being, this is actually an exterior wall. If you follow my cursor, you can see that the building envelope, the heated portion of the house, and the full basement foundation is following this line right here. So that's why, other than this wall not having siding on it, we're typically just going to sheetrock that on the inside of the garage. But other than that, structurally, this is exactly like an exterior wall. So this is one of those rare cases where an interior wall, technically it's inside, right? But it is an exterior wall because it sits on a foundation, it has a mud sill, and it's a 2x6 insulated wall. So other than those exceptions, I think the exterior dimensions here are pretty straightforward. We're going to dimension to the center of all the openings, and we're going to dimension to the edges of all of the jogs in the house. So if you have any questions on exterior dimensions, don't hesitate to reach out. We're going to shift our attention now to the interior dimensions, which are, as you may have guessed, quite a bit more complicated. So let's take a look at this thing. As we kind of start looking on the inside, we have to start identifying those walls that are running north and south, and we're going to put a horizontal dimension on that. I usually like to start with the vertical walls, but it really doesn't matter which way you go as long as you get them all in there. What I'm looking for is a clear path for my dimension string to pass all the way through the house, right? And I just don't have one. There's too much clutter going on over in this master bedroom area. So I just found something that was as close a compromise as I could find, and that was about right here. So again, what you chose to pick up all of these vertical walls in this sort of northern part of the house is kind of up to your interpretation. As long as it's readable, it's consistent, and it follows as many of the annotation guidelines as possible, you're going to be in good shape. One place I did choose to jog this a little bit, again, jogging these is not wrong, it's just you need a reason, right? We don't want it jumping all over the place randomly just because the drafter is too lazy to align them, right? But in this case, I had a reason, so I moved it down a little bit just to make sure that this dimension was readable. But it's still close enough to that dimension string that it's not going to cause the contractor any confusion at all trying to find that thing. Let's go down to this next one. I started over on the right with this one and I worked my way left. But this one, again, it starts on the exterior face of the exterior wall, and then I'm just picking up all the left side of the walls that I'm crossing. When you're trying to decide which walls to include in a single string, think about it as a single tape pull. So if you drop a tape measure down, will you cross all of the walls that you're dimensioning on that string? And I would make the argument that in this case, yes, we would. We could put the tape measure right about here, run it through all of this, and make all of those marks pretty easily. It's crossing all of them. Same thing up here. We can cross all of these walls with a single tape pull. The tape pull is not necessarily where the dimension line is. It's just the objects that the extension lines are referencing. So we could put the actual tape measure here perhaps, run it all the way through and pick up the majority of the walls, maybe even run it down here and cross all of them. When we get all done with our major strings, we would come back and we'd take a look and see if there are any individual walls that we missed or that just didn't make sense to include in those overall strings, and we would just add an auxiliary dimension in that location only. Just remember that when you're putting in auxiliary dimensions, make sure that you're starting with an existing known object like this wall right here. We're picking up the location of this door. We know the location of that wall because it's defined in the overall string. So let's take a look at the vertical dimensions. Once we get all of our walls that are running north and south dimensioned, and we think we've got them all, we can come back and we can do the vertical dimensions and pick up all of our horizontal walls. So on this one, I started over at this area right here, and I'm running a dimension line and I'm crossing the top side of all of the walls that I'm crossing. So that one is really straightforward. I had to add a second dimension string over here because I have a whole other series of walls and things that are going on in this area right here. Okay, and so I'm coming up and I'm hitting all of these interior walls. Now you might wonder, well, why am I not dimensioning this corner right here? And the reason is because that's already defined out here. This is an exterior wall, remember. We're only needing to pick up the interior walls and show where those are at. Up here a little bit farther, you'll notice that this wall right here has its own dimension. How wide this bathroom is defined by this dimension right here. You might ask, well, why didn't I include it in this string? Well, the more you think about that, the more you realize that is sort of violating that hopping back and forth across a hallway kind of rule. And also it would create such a small dimension between this wall and this corner that we're trying to define. It just adds too much confusion. It's going to make that contractor have to do head math that he really doesn't want to do. So again, coming from a wall where we already know the dimension, the location of it, I can just add a single dimension to define the width of that bathroom. Over in this area right here, I needed something to define the location and the width of the fireplace. So you can see I'm coming off of the exterior wall to define the location of this wall and this wall, but it really wasn't necessary to continue a string all the way through because these walls are kind of handled by this overall string right here. Now you might ask, well, could I have included the overall string here with all of these? Yes, but now can you do it in a single tape pull, right? Can you put a tape measure on the wall here and pick up and mark these two walls and these three walls, right? And the answer is maybe, but you'd have to be really good at projecting lines across with your eyes, and that's just not an accurate way to do it. So in this case, a separate dimension string, because we couldn't do it with a single tape pull, is usually the best strategy. Right over here we have one more string, and you'll notice that it's coming up from an exterior side of an exterior wall, and we're hitting the tops of these three walls right here. Now your tape pull is probably going to be right here, right? So you can mark these three horizontal walls and probably the location of the edge of this island cabinet. I want to double back and talk about this string once also. You'll notice that, not this string, sorry, this string, you notice that we're not defining the width of this cabinet because the units themselves are defined elsewhere. And so as long as they know where to place this on the floor, both horizontally and vertically, they're going to be able to build this island exactly how it looks right there. One other thing I get a number of questions on is, well, should I have continued this string all the way up to this exterior wall? And you really just in that scenario kind of have to ask yourself, is that necessary? Do I need to measure it from both directions? Would that contractor want to be able to pull the dimension down from this wall? And I would argue that probably not, just because there's really nothing else going on here. We wouldn't need an interior dimension for this corner because we already have one outside, right? We've picked up this alcove with these exterior dimensions, which is what we would want to do normally. So having another one on the inside is just sort of redundant, and it's also not an interior wall. Again, I'd like to point out that there's more than one right way to dimension a floor plan, and my way is just something that it's just sort of a collection of thoughts and general philosophies about dimensioning that I've picked up over the years based on lots of stuff that I've looked at and different projects I've worked on and different standards from offices that I've worked in. And I think it strikes a pretty good balance between the variations that you're going to see across the board. But as long as, when you think about dimensioning something or putting annotations on something, I think the overall rule has to be, A, am I working within the boundaries of the CAD standards that my office requires? And then number two, is what I'm doing, can what I'm doing and the way I'm doing it be justified or explained if I'm asked about it? Did I think it through, or did I just throw it on there randomly because I didn't know, right? That's the second one is not an okay to go about it. The first one should always be your guiding light. Okay, so kind of a circle back to some of the discussion about the other annotations, right? That's I think enough on the dimensions. Let's talk about the tags. Again, we're going to give every window a tag with a letter in it, and in the case of a triple unit like this, depending on how you're going to call it out in the window schedule, it's certainly fine to just do a single tag. If there were 3 separate windows that were just sort of arranged close by each other, each one would have its own tag, but you can use your best judgment on that. Again, letters for windows, and those can be duplicated. Numbers for doors, those all have to have a unique number. Room labels, important. Those are going to be typically a larger text size. Certainly in this class, we're going to be using that 3/16 text instead of the 3/32 for the room labels. And then the local notes are just going to be using liters probably, or just text. All that's going to be 3/32 printed height. There may be some general notes off to the side, but just because those can get really lengthy and we're not really focusing on that with this exercise, we're going to leave those off entirely. So finally, I want to shift gears and talk about the sheet setup and the annotations that go along with that, because those are really just as important as what's going in the view itself. The view title, again, we're looking at just describing what we're looking at here. Okay, it's not the assignment. It's not anything else other than just simply main floor plan, or if there's only one floor, just floor plan. That's enough. It's obvious, yes, but we got to put something in there, so we might as well describe what it is we're looking at just to make it clear. Detail number on top, sheet number on bottom. Sheet number matches that in the title block. Title block is describing the name of the assignment in the main box. Beyond that, it's your initials, the course, the sheet, which again is going to often mimic what's on the detail title, and then finally the drawing number. Make sure that when you generate your PDF that your viewport is to the correct scale, and then also make sure that you've set your LT scale settings so that your hidden lines are showing up the way they're supposed to. That's it for exercise 7. Let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the basement of this thing for exercise 8. So the main difference between dimensioning a basement plan and a main floor plan is that we can't pull the tape across the floor for interior dimensions the same way that we do on the main floor. In other words, we have to contend with the fact that we're in a basement and we have a concrete wall surrounding us. So that is on the basement where all the dimension lines should start and stop. And I know that can be a little bit confusing because we drive home the fact that we always start on the outside face on an exterior wall. We just can't do it. It's not physically possible in a basement. So we're going to terminate all of our dimensions at the face of concrete inside. The exterior dimensions are going to be largely the same. In this particular one, we've only got 2 windows in the entire basement, so there's really only going to be a couple of dimension strings where there's going to be 3 of them. The other ones, all we need really is 2. The overall from corner to corner, and then the overall from end of house to end of house. Now I do get some questions about this, and it's just a matter of me going back and fixing it, but this overall dimension and this jog right here is just not included in this plan. So I will go out and fix that, but just bear in mind that that was my oversight. You know, doing this stuff is hard. There's a lot to look at, and it's easy to make a mistake, and I did. So that's all that is. So just keep in mind there should be one more extension line coming up here and included in this first string, and then this 54 actually should be including all the way out to that corner. Everything else I think is pretty well defined. I would say that if I was going to do anything else, I would probably define that distance like we did on the main floor, from the edge of this foundation down to this corner, just to show what that offset is. So I am actually going to go back and fix those things for next year as I'm looking at them now. Let's shift to the interior dimensions. You notice that we're only going to be including the walls that are in here, there's very few of them, right? There's not a whole lot of wall stuff going on. And then over in this area, there's 0 because this happens to be a partially full basement house. And over here, it's just a crawl space. So you can kind of think of this foundation wall around here is sort of just like an earth dam holding back that outer dirt from coming into this 4-foot deep space. This one is a full 8-foot depth, plus or minus. And so these walls are actually going all the way down to hold that dirt back, just in this area right here. So that limits the number of interior dimensions to over here. We would not run interior dimensions across to show the width of that crawl space, right? That's defined by these exterior dimensions already. All of the exterior walls on this thing, the foundation walls, are defined outside. These interior ones, limited number of them, because we just don't have that many interior walls. So we're picking up this one, and then we just run right up to here. Across here we have another string hitting this, this, and this, and that's really all there is. We probably could even get rid of a few more of these dimensions if we didn't want to give the contractor the ability to measure it from either side. Other annotations that we're going to see on the inside are related to the structural components above. So these notes right here, this TJI 11 7/8 TJI 360 joist at 19.2 inches on center, is referencing the floor joists that are spanning across this opening, and they are actually running left and right, and the spacing is north to south. Where you see a separate note, that means that's going to be a different size joist in that area. And so you can see that we can kind of think of this floor plan as 3 separate spanning bays. Okay, one here, and one here, which means that we have load-bearing supports at this exterior wall, this exterior wall, this exterior wall. Everything's running east and west. We also have one more load-bearing support right up the middle here. This is a load-bearing wall as well, an interior one. And so what we have shown there are a series of load-bearing walls, beams, and then a footing underneath the whole thing, or a thickened slab underneath the whole thing to support it. All of that stuff needs to be called out. We're using local notes for that. Here we're calling out the load-bearing wall, and we're also hatching it to show where it is. And then right here, we're calling out the beam going across this opening, and we're calling that out right here with this local note. We're going to get more into the specifics of how we come up with that stuff next semester, but for now, we wanted to get everybody at least acclimated to the idea that we have to put in our structural stuff, and where we put it is below the structure that it's referencing. So in other words, we have to put it in the basement because we're talking about the main floor structure. Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. This recording got a little bit lengthy, but hey, you know, we got a lot to cover. We have a little bit from past weeks that we didn't get to, so we had to kind of tack that in somewhere. Again, I apologize for having to cancel class yet again today. I'm trying to get better. It's just not having a lot of luck with it for whatever reason. I just don't want to spread that to everybody else. Reach out if you have any questions on anything contained in this recording, and then also especially reach out if you have questions on the current assignments. Hopefully you guys are off and running with those and that's working okay for you. Just a quick note about availability. I will not be available after Friday this week. I'm going to be traveling on Saturday and out of the country on Sunday. So please reach out before that. Don't hesitate to just send me an email. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible right up until Friday night. That's going to kind of be my cutoff for help this week. Okay? Reach out with questions and have a great break, and we'll see you all next time in class.